Welcome back, everyone, to the Midnight Post. This is part two of our cattle mutilation episode. I'm your host, Jeff. With me, as always, is Jason,
Here as well.
and we're going to cover the rest of this phenomenon. I guess you could call it. I think that's a pretty appropriate term, right?
Yes, it would definitely be under that.
um, okay, so where we left off last time, we were just kind of speculating on who could be behind this and why.
Yep.
The government was a possible option, as well as alien. I mean, something not from this planet, or maybe from this planet. You know, there's always the alien theories about they come from inside the Earth, but we're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. um, so I want to talk about a little bit again the mutilation itself and what's going on with these cows, but because I think that kind of informs maybe the goal of these mutilations, or the why that we keep talking about. So as I said, sometimes the cow is dead when it happens, and sometimes it's alive, apparently, which is a terrible thing to think about. If you can imagine, having the eye removed while this thing is conscious, most likely with no sedative. Um, so and one of the reasons we know that, for example, is that one of the cows had a teardrop coming out of its eye, um, and they actually took the fluid from that and tested it, and it tested that there was adrenaline in this tear, meaning that the cow was most likely under some sort of stress when this was happening, or when it died. And also, the teardrop was going down the side of the face, rather than if it was laying on its side, it would go kind of toward the nose, down the front of the face. But it was standing vertical when this teardrop was coming down, and had adrenaline in it, meaning most likely this cow was standing up when the eyes and whatever else organs were removed. So that actually leads me to an interview that I had found, and Jason, I'm going to get your thoughts on this afterward, from Drexel Lawson. He has a livestock removal service in Colorado. Back in the 70s, he started it. And he, at one point, hauled over 4,000 animals in 2 years.
Wow.
And a good number of those were mutilated. I think it was over 40 of the cattle that he took out were mutilated. So basically, one quote from him is that the first one he came across, first one scared the hell out of me. He told this to Linda Moulton Howe, who did a fantastic documentary called A Strange Harvest that I definitely recommend that you go check out. And you can actually see the interview that she did with this guy. But he talks about in that interview that usually when the animal dies, they'll thrash around a lot and mash down the grass and dirt around them, kind of like the nerves going off and whatnot, kind of like you see in anything when it dies. The first one that he came across, he said that this cow looked like she had just been picked up or turned over or something, because none of the grass around her or any of the dirt or anything was mashed down at all. It wasn't disturbed whatsoever. So that's super weird. And then also, he said there wasn't even any blood, which is typical, like we talked about in the last episode, completely drained. So he said that he feels strongly about the UFO idea in these cases, because the incisions look like they were done with, he said, this is from him, heated laser. Because when animals bite, they have to tear the meat away. They tear the skin.
Yes.
It's not a clean cut whatsoever. These were like exact, precision laser cuts. And to give you another example of back then, how unlikely this would have been, laser cutting equipment, like you would find in hospitals and whatnot, they were about 8 feet tall and weighed 400 pounds. And they got their power from a wall plug, like you plug them in. So it's not like, you have some satanic cult hauling a laser cutter out in the middle of a field in the middle of the night to cut open these cows.
No.
So, I mean, when you hear something like that, and Jason, I'm directing this to you, like when you hear something like that from somebody who removes livestock for a living, he knows what he's talking about, right? I mean, it has to give you pause.
Well, it does. Well, I have a hard time believing that it might be laser um, equipment being used, but it's still the fact of the precision behind it. That leads me to believe, like you said, it's not a satanic cult carrying around this massive piece of equipment and getting power sources from what's outside of their time frame. You know, today you might be able to do that, but we're talking 40-ish years later. So I agree that it's not a natural sense behind what is causing these.
Yeah. And I want to speak a little bit more too with the blood situation. So some experts say that it is possible that the blood could actually have gravitated down deeper into some of the remaining organs and kind of pooled there or stored there. Again, that's somewhat unlikely though.
Mm.
It's just, and this guy even said that they were talking to for this specific case. He said that, this isn't to say that this is the case every time. It's actually kind of rare, and that if there isn't an autopsy done, that could be the case. But a lot of these, when they do have the autopsy done, and the coroner is like, "Yeah, there's no blood." I mean, it's kind of conclusive in that situation. Same thing with like the tongue. A lot of times when cattle die, their tongue will kind of stick out a little bit further than it normally would, which it could possibly offer it toward a predator. But I mean, how likely is it that you're gonna have a wolf or a coyote come up and only eat the tongue and not touch the rest of the body?
Almost
I
never,
mean,
and not to mention that's still skipping over the fact of the surgical precision behind the removal of the tongue.
right?
A lot of times it's not just ripped out; it's cut out.
Yeah, yeah. And so I do want to address one thing as well quickly, and this kind of it really annoyed me at the time when I watched it. So there was this show on Sci-Fi called Fact or Faked, and they took a look at this phenomena, and basically they attributed um, the cuts,
Mm.
and I say that in quotes because they would say that in quotes, to the bloating of the cattle and the skin basically tearing. And so I think it's possible in some cases that could have been it. But when you've got a perfect cut around an organ, do we really want to say that's just regular bloating? It
But
doesn't make any sense.
right, they're still leaving out very important facts because let's just hypothetically for a minute say it was bloating. Okay, if the creature or the animal did bloat enough that it tore the skin at such a high rate that it split and it looks almost surgical. But you're going to have evidence. There's going to be liquids oozing out of this. There's going to be other signs of internal pressure, which is not mentioned. It's literally like kind of like you just said, bloating caused the tear. Okay, moving on. They skipped over some very key pieces of evidence.
Yeah. I mean, not to mention the blood missing, the anus being cored out. Bloating doesn't cause that. It just doesn't.
Right.
Um, so the Daily Mail actually talked to Christopher O'Brien, who is an investigator who's checked out over 400 cases, and he said that there were at least what was it? At least 40 or more that he could not explain, or that they were done by intelligent mover, a prime mover. An intelligence affected this somehow, guaranteed. Um, and when you have something that's inconclusive like that, I think it's pretty noteworthy. So basically, he said that, and he actually doesn't believe the alien argument, interestingly enough, but he says his strangest case was one of a mutilated calf in Del Norte, Colorado. He said it was really, really freaky because it wouldn't rot. It was found in complete pristine condition in a 5-inch snowfield without any drops of blood in the snow. All the blood had been taken from the animal. This month-old calf was missing its spine from the hips to the skull, and the brain was gone. Its right front leg was gone, the vast majority of its ribs, both eyes, the ears, the intestines, the reproductive tract, and the lungs had been removed. The rectum was also mutilated, and its heart and liver were excised, but left the inside intact in the body cavity. The chief medical veterinary pathologist said it wasn't any animal that did that. So, I mean, that's like, you know, there's no way to do that, especially in the middle of the night in the middle of a field. It's just not going to happen.
No.
And so I can see why that would be what he would call his strangest case.
Right.
Um, So yeah, and some of these too, interesting to note, these high strangeness cases are less likely to be reported by ranchers because they don't want the attention. Carla and John Shear of Miss McPherson County, Kansas, discovered one of their pregnant cows dead with one eye removed, and both her top and bottom eyelids and eyelashes were excised in January of 2017. So if you thought this was over, think again. Um, so the mass of the mutilations happened in the 70s, like we talked about. Um, and like you said, Jason, in the last episode, some of it was, and you know, some people thought that it was a secretive government effort to research animal plagues such as mad cow or prion disease, Prion disease. Um, I don't really know what it is overall. I mean, looking at all the evidence, um, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. I'm sure I completely botched that name, but it's a horrendous affliction that could cause than you could imagine, is what it says in this Daily Mail article. It's 100% fatal. Produces large holes in the brain tissue and creates holes like Swiss cheese in the neuron system, and the brain synapses start to misfire. You forget to breathe, and your autonomic system starts to break down. So,
Wow.
for example, that's one of the things that these cattle could be dealing with. Do I think that that's causing cattle mutilations? I don't think so. I think that's a stretch. That's like saying Roswell was a weather balloon.
Right.
That's just something they're going to throw out there, try and cover up what could actually be going on. Um, I don't know why they would want to cover it up. Um, I don't even know if they're trying to cover it up, to be honest with you. I don't. The FBI researched it. No really conclusive, you know, data was drawn from that.
No.
Um, I don't know. I really don't know, but it is still very much so going on. Um, I don't know. So, Jason, do you have any kind of final thoughts on this topic? Like, what do you feel is doing this? If you had to, put a pin in anything, what do you think it would be?
Um, if I had to go with my own personal opinion, it is definitely some form of experimentation. Um, I'm not sold on government experimenting due to mad cow disease or something like that. And I'm not 100% sold that aliens from outside of Earth or from inside of Earth came and are experimenting on cattle, but not as many others. But regardless, it's still some form of experimentation. What, whom, or why, I can't make a definitive answer on that. There's too much wrapped around this to definitively say that's it, because there's enough evidence for multiple solutions, and all more all the more reason to speculate on what is there. And what is there are mutilations with surgical precision. There are oddities that explain why it is not something versus why it is something, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
no, it does. I think we could. I think we could safely rule out predators.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that wolves or coyotes are coring out, uh, you know, uh, sex organs.
No.
I don't think that they are, removing only the eyes and leaving all the actual meat. They're definitely not just chewing off the ear and walking away. So I think that's ruled out. I think the government idea is most likely ruled out because, you know, the government can get away with a lot of things, but let's face it, I don't think they're going to be landing a helicopter or driving all this surgical equipment out into the field in the middle of the night with a expert surgeon
And they're
to core out these things.
and they're definitely not
I
going to
don't.
drag it on for 40 years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you would think that by then you would have the data at that point, but I don't know. Um, I mean, things do change though. I think that especially nowadays, cattle have a lot more steroids in them than they used to.
Mm-hmm.
They've been genetically altered to produce the best meat and the most meat, right? So um,
Correct.
maybe there is some reason to keep testing them or keep studying. You never know when one of these plagues or any disease is going to crop up. I mean, look at what we're dealing right now with COVID-19. But
Cool.
again, this is just kind of branching out off one point. I don't think it's the government. I do think I would lean toward the alien explanation, just because Um, and Jason, hear me out on this.
Hmm.
Actually, let's just go all in. Okay,
Okay.
so if, and I don't know, so even for the listeners, I don't know if this will make you, see me differently or not. But so basically, I think that we as humans are most likely some sort of genetic experiment that, you know, aliens from another planet or something have done. I think that they're here and I think they're monitoring us and our growth. And I think that we have some of their DNA. Maybe they mixed us with like primate DNA, and that's why we're kind of half and half, half intelligent, but half muscular and able to survive different things. If you look at like a gray alien or what they call the tall whites, that are like basically gray aliens but slightly taller. And again, this is out just in La La Land right now. We're not, you know, just
No, like you
go
said,
with me
let's put
here.
it out on the table.
Yeah, so we would like be a mix of those two. So we've got the intelligence and the brawn, and they're studying us. Well, what do we do as humans with the animals and creatures around us? We study them. We
Right.
breed them. We, study their sex organs. We study their eyes. We study everything. So if we, like you said in the last episode, our prime food source is cattle, is hamburger, meat. And so if they see that and they're like, well, these humans have evolved naturally to, um, you know, genetically modify and purposely breed for the slaughter these cattle, maybe we need to take a look at this and see if this is something that we could incorporate into our diet or see why the humans are doing this. Um, I think that that's just as plausible as anything else. And like we talked about just a second ago, cattle aren't the same as they were in 1970.
No.
So if it's still going on, like that case in 2017, I mean, there is reason to continue the study.
Yeah,
You don't study mice one time and then, never again.
and honestly, I know you mentioned, kind of fair warning on people seeing you as differently, but you could almost you could almost put reason behind the we are our own experiments, meaning aliens put us here, experimented on however you want. Um, Without going crazy deep here, an alien could have put us here, okay, or put everything here, which would also tie into most religions that there is a higher being that put us here, okay. So if they did do that, let's just say thousands of years ago, an alien species did put us here because they genetically designed us. Okay, they designed us just a tad bit smarter than everything else. Well, they were a tad bit smarter than probably what was around them, so they created us. And kind of to bring apart or pick apart what you said too was, what do we do? We're kind of the top of the food chain on the intelligence pole. We do the same thing. We experiment. We gene splice. We clone. We constantly try to mess with genetics. So who's to say the aliens aren't still here watching us if they're the ones that put us here and seeing how we do and create and live? For all we know, they just dropped us here and we're just in a, so to say, a petri dish, and they're just watching us under a microscope.
Yeah, and I mean, too, even to expand on this whole crazy theory. So, like we talked about the government, why they wouldn't take these cattle for their own and study their own, pool of cattle. Um, Whereas, like, sorry, I think viewers can see my dog in the background. Um, so I think that say that you had aliens studying these things, they can't. I mean, they could, but they're not likely to take a bunch of cattle off to planet Gazorpazorp and study these things. Like they're going to study them here because these are the ones that we are directly eating. These are the ones that are most relevant to us. This isn't an alien cow off on this other planet. So it would make sense because aliens don't have a plot of land. They didn't pay the realtor to buy 40 acres to store these cattle. So
Right.
if we were going to talk about why we would take civilian cattle, that could be another reason why.
Yeah, and who's to say they're not just experimenting to see how we react? They're doing
Yeah,
this not only for their own research, but to see how we handle this situation.
yeah, yeah. That's another option. So I think you know any theory is as crazy as the next, especially in something like this. The only things that we can say 100% for sure is this is happening. This is real. We
Hmm.
have photos, we have videos. This isn't some cryptid that, is photographed in a blurry image in the woods.
No.
This is something that is very much real, very much costing farmers money, um, and it's still going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We may revisit the skin later if new evidence comes about, or if we get some compelling evidence, or something that's like right in our faces. But
Yeah, I have a
I mean,
feeling this is going to be an ongoing topic, not just for us, but for a lot of people.
yeah, and I think it's something that a lot of people aren't paying attention to right now either. Like I follow a few different websites that have paranormal news and things like that, and this isn't something that's brought up a lot recently. So
No, a
I
lot of
think it's
people
definitely,
see it as if it's not crazy enough, it's not news. But then there's the other half
yeah,
that would see it as, well, there was only 40 cases. There was only this many during this time. So they write it off because it's not a high enough number to justify their own interest.
right, yeah. And we've talked about this privately, like you and I, in just regular conversation. It only takes one to be real. Like
Right,
that's all it takes. If one
exactly.
crop circle's real, if one mutilation was done by an alien, like it happened. So I don't know.
Right.
I mean, aliens could not even exist for all we know. But then again, I don't believe that whatsoever. So I think we've talked about this too. It's mathematically impossible for them not to exist based on the number of
Right.
planets in the Goldilocks zone and whatever else. Not that's assuming that they're like us, in their physiology.
Yeah,
I don't know.
physiology.
I mean, make myself look dumb right here at the end of the episode, so that's great. Anyway, so yeah, I think we're gonna call it there. Jason, thanks again for joining me,
Always.
and we will catch you next time on the Midnight Post.